Let's start with our motivation. So last week we were talking about how karma ripens at the time of death, how it throws us or propels us into another rebirth. And that rebirth too is governed by ignorance, afflictions, and karma. And in that rebirth as well, we're trying to be happy and not suffer, and yet not understanding what cyclic existence is, not understanding how karma functions. Then we create many causes for misery for ourselves and others, but don't understand why we're unhappy. So we have great fortune in meeting the Buddhist teachings that present the situation to us. And we're fortunate to have a mind that thinks clearly, that can analyze and discern and check up and see if the teachings are true or not. And if they are, then to put them into practice. So let's use this opportunity to change our situation, and by extension to change the situation of all living beings by attaining full awakening, so that we can have the skills necessary to lead others out of this quite dysfunctional round of ignorance and karma and suffering, and more ignorance and karma and suffering. So with this kind of long-term goal, then we'll listen and discuss this evening. So, last week we worked mostly from the great treatise. Did we read through Gomchen Lamrim? Okay, maybe I'll read through that as kind of a summary, a reminder from last week, and then we'll continue on. Okay, so we'll start with the factors of death, the exhaustion of lifespan, the exhaustion of merit, and then death from failure to avoid danger, or death from the ripening of some kind of very powerful karma that cuts short the lifespan. And then this next session, the thinking at death. So at death, the two virtuous or non-virtuous thinking may arise in your mind while the coarse consciousness persists. So this is, while we're still breathing, the heart's still working, before you've gotten to the subtle mind of the white, red, and the different kinds of appearances. Okay, if you die in a neutral state of mind, neither of the two kinds of thinking mentioned above occurs. Those who have accomplished virtue, so if you accumulate a lot of virtue in your life, will seem to pass from darkness to light, and their death throes will be less intense. For those who have accumulated much non-virtue, it is the opposite. When they die, they perceive various unpleasant forms and experience great suffering. Yeah, so while the winds are are absorbing, the elements are losing the power to sustain consciousness, then there's all sorts of visions that appear to the dying mind according to their karmic visions, according to the karma that we've created. And so, of course, then we start reacting to those visions in the mind because we think they're real. Just like when we're dreaming, we think the dreams are real, and in this life we think what we see is real. Yeah, so same kind of mechanism. Okay, when they die, they perceive various unpleasant forms and experience great suffering. Those whose actions were neutral at death experience neither pain nor joy. It is taught that aside from rebirth as a god or as a hell being, death throes are experienced for all kinds of rebirth. Does it say throes there? Yeah, death throes. Okay, here the word got left out. Okay, so unless you're going to be reborn as a god or a hell being, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe when you're dying from being, no, that doesn't make any sense either, because gods have horrible experience at death. And for sure, in terms of hell beings, he describes what's going. Well, he describes the bardo a little bit later on. Yeah, it would make. I don't understand. Let's see if this is any help in here. Doesn't seem to talk about it here. No, we come to... But death throes happen when you're still in this life. So we're not talking about the bardo here. We're talking about death, the death process. So, if you're going to be born as a god, maybe you created a lot of virtue, so your death throes are less intense. But certainly, if there's a hell being, karma ripening, it's going to be a miserable death. On the other hand, if this means if you're dying from a god realm, yes, they have bad deaths. But if you're dying from a hell being, and it can only get better. Yeah. So I'm not sure. Okay. If anybody finds anything what they're reading, then please share it. When you die, between virtuous and non-virtuous thinking, whichever is most familiar to you will manifest. So we talked about that, how we're creatures of habit, and so it's very important to have a lot of introspective awareness now and look at our habitual ways of thinking. And if we see, the tendency to really get into negative ways of thinking, to start to retrain the mind and rehabituate our mind to another way of thinking. So the same old thing doesn't happen at the time of death. If you are equally familiar with both, whatever you think of first will remain manifest, and you cannot think of anything else. So, virtue or non-virtue, whichever you think of first, your mind fixates on that. However, what do you have? However, okay, this is an extra thing. However, when the subtle aspect of the mind comes into play, both kinds of thinking cease and the mind becomes neutral. Because at that point, all the conceptual minds have ceased. So the mind hasn't left the body, but there's no more conceptual consciousness going on. So, of course, thinking virtue or thinking non-virtue isn't going to be happening at that time. When dying, as long as various appearances remain clear, due to protracted familiarization, attachment to yourself arises. So you're having all these appearances, and there's attachment to yourself. Through the power of attachment to yourself, you think, I will cease to exist. Okay, so you're kind of, I guess, looks like you're attached to who you are right now. And because everything is absorbing, I mean, everything that we've based our whole ego identity on, is now evaporating, and we have nothing to hold on to. Then there's this feeling of, the I is totally ceasing, and that's terrifying. A feeling of attachment to your body occurs, okay? Why the body? Because the body is, the basis of the self, kind of where the self resides. So you get attached to yourself, so then it goes to attachment to this body. I got to hang on to the body. And that generates the intermediate state, okay? And it seems to me that when you're attached to this body and then you realize you can't hang on to it anymore, then the attachment just shifts to the next body. I need somebody, anybody. So we don't have much wisdom at that point. Okay, stream enters and once returners do not yield to attachment to the self. In non-returners, attachment to the self does not occur. So it seems that attachment to the self has to really do with the desire realm. Yeah, because non-returners will not, return to the desire realm, whereas stream enters and once returners will. Yeah. Okay, then from where the heat withdraws, for the virtuous and for those who lack virtue, respectively, from the lower and upper body, heat withdraws and the consciousness departs from the heart. Yeah? So if somebody with lots of non-virtue, the heat starts from the head down. If you have virtue, the heat starts from the feet up. And then eventually it collects, the consciousness collects at the heart and departs from the heart. First when you are born and last when you die, respectively, the consciousness enters the blood and fluid in the center of the heart and then leaves from there. Okay, so when we're born, everything grows. Well, from that single zygote, everything grows, but that is the center of, it's the heart chakra from where everything grows, and everything comes back into that when we die. Then how after death you reach the intermediate stage? So like a scale that tips, once you die you immediately enter the intermediate state. Okay? You arise with complete senses, so you have all your senses, the body shape of your future rebirth, which I've heard is it's going to resemble your body when you're 8 years old, if you're a human being. Don't ask me why 8 and not 7 and not 13. Yeah, right, good. I'm glad you remember. Okay, the body shape of your rebirth, which is said both can and cannot be changed. So Vasubandhu says once you enter the bardo and that karma has ripened for the future rebirth, then you may go through these short deaths in the bardo, but you don't change what your future rebirth is going to be, whereas Sangha says that it can change. So that's why he says both can and cannot be changed. Depends who you're listening to, as in so many things. Okay, so fellow intermediate beings and those with pure divine sight see intermediate state beings, okay? So fellow intermediate state, it doesn't say if they're going to be reborn in the same realm as you or a different realm. It's unclear, but other bardo beings and human beings who have actualized the divine eye, which is one of the super knowledges that's gained from developing a very deep state of samadhi. Okay? And also the ones with the divine sight can see the next place of birth, where the Bardo beings are going to be reborn. So according to this, the people who are left behind cannot see the Bardo beings. Yeah. So if you're seeing your relatives or seeing other things, it might be a spirit, it might be your imagination, it might be who knows what, we don't know. Okay? The virtuous and those who lack virtue in the intermediate state see light and darkness respectively. It is said in the Entry into the Womb Sutra that their color is like that, okay? So for hell beings, like a burnt log. For animals, like smoke. For hungry ghosts, like water. And for human beings in desire realm gods, like gold. So those are the color of the Bardo beings, okay? For future form realm beings, the intermediate state is white. In the case of rebirth in the formless realm, there is no intermediate state. Okay? Because there's no body to take in the formless realm. Yeah. In the intermediate state of a god, you ascend. As a human, you move forward. In the intermediate state of a wrongdoer, you advance with your head lowered. Okay. As for the lifespan in the intermediate state, the maximum duration is 7 days. If you find your place of rebirth, the duration is not certain, so you might be reborn before the 7 days is up. If you don't find it, then it's 7 days. Then you go through a mini death and you arise in a new Bardo being body. After 7 days, you change your body. It is possible to remain 7 weeks. As the seeds of the intermediate state rebirth may be altered, that's according to a Sangha, a being in the intermediate state of a god may be reborn in another state, or can any other kind of intermediate state being. The principle is the same. Some believe the Muni, the Buddha, stated that the intermediate state of a god lasts 7 days of a god rebirth and so on, but here this is not accepted. Okay, then from there, how you take rebirth in a new life. Okay, so we'll go back. So that's a good review where we were, and then we'll go back to the great treatise. Okay. Now here it's interesting. There's appears to be different versions here, but I'll explain in a minute. So it says, if a being of the intermediate state is to be born in a womb, it observes beings of the same type as itself at its future birthplace. So if you're going to be reborn as a human being, you observe human beings. If a dog, you observe dogs. Okay, the intermediate state being, then wishes to gaze at them, play with them, and so forth, and desires to reach this place. It misperceives the father's semen and its mother's blood as its parents lying together, as parents are not actually lying together at this time yet. As if in illusion, it sees them lying together and becomes attached. Some other scriptures say that the parents are together at that time, and the Bardo being sees them being together. Okay, if the being is to be reborn female, it turns away from the woman and desires the man, wanting to lie with him. If it is to be born male, it turns away from the man and desires the woman, wanting to lie with her. In this way, as the levels of yogic deeds explains, it does not see its actual parents. It sees them lying together through misperceiving the semen and blood. But they say blood because they don't understand it's the egg. Okay? But other times it says that it's actually seeing the parents together. So there's two views. Okay? Having conceived such a desire, the being of the intermediate state draws closer and closer to the man and woman, eventually arriving at a point where it cannot see any part of their bodies except for their genitals. Angry at this sight, it dies and is reborn. Why it gets angry, I don't know. It doesn't explain. It seems to have desire up to that point, and then all of a sudden anger. Yeah. But anyway, it dies from the Bardo being, and it takes rebirth inside the sperm and egg. Okay. Moreover, the mother and father generate desire, which becomes intense for a period, and at the end of which a gelatinous semen is emitted. Then drops of semen and blood invariably issue forth from the two of them, mixing within the mother's reproductive tract, then congealing like the skin on the top of boiled milk that has been allowed to cool. Beautiful. Yeah. Isn't this just what you always wanted? Okay. I've also heard that the being kind of falls in a faint when it sees the parents. It enters the father's mouth, joins into the semen, goes out his reproductive organ, and then the consciousness, that's in the semen, in the sperm, join with the egg, and that's when fertilization occurs. So there seems to be different versions of how this happens. Then the question comes, well, what happens when it's a test tube baby? And what happens when they freeze the eggs? Because sometimes, don't they fertilize the eggs and then freeze them? Yeah? So is the being there in the fertilized egg? Does it experience cold when it's frozen? Yeah. Or, in some way, does it enter after that? But it always seems to say that it enters at the time of conception. So there's a lot of questions that come up that it doesn't deal with here because they didn't have these things at that time. Yeah. So what happens at a sperm bank? Yeah. Does the consciousness enter the sperm and then just sit there in the test tube with the sperm, or does it enter once the sperm hits, touches the egg when there's artificial insemination? I don't know. Yeah, these kind of questions always come up when the Tibetan lamas teach this. Yeah. So I'm just bringing them up so I don't know the answer. Okay. Where's the word? Okay. At this point, so now the consciousness is in the stuff that's congealed like the skin on top of boiled milk that's been allowed to cool. At this point, the intermediate state of the being who is to be reborn ends, and this being's, here it says fundamental consciousness, that he's going according to a Sangha here, and a Sangha states a mind basis of all, a foundational consciousness, so that's, he's going according to that. So he's saying that enters the congealed mass. The force of this consciousness brings together a developed combination of blood and semen that is conducive to producing the sense faculties, as well as a mixture of the former congealed blood and semen and subtle traces of the four great elements that are the causes of the five sensory faculties. So you have the blood and the semen and all these different elements that can form the sense faculties. Everything's coming together. These traces are something something that is other than the congealed blood and semen. So it appears from this point of view that some other material substance joins in. Something that has sensory faculties and that is other than what was formerly there arises. After the consciousness has entered, at this point it is called rebirth. So that's the moment of rebirth, okay, when the consciousness enters the fertilized egg. Those who do not accept that a fundamental consciousness exists asserts that the mental consciousness takes rebirth. So we know that from tenets. If it's not, Prasangikas don't assert a mind basis of all, so they say just the continuity of the mental consciousness enters there. If the being of the intermediate state has accumulated little merit, it is born into a low class. As it dies and enters the womb, it hears a loud clamor, and it sees itself entering a marsh, a thick forest, or some other such place. Okay, so let's say you're going to be reborn as a human being. You have a lot of virtuous karma that's ripening for that, but you don't have a lot of the completing karma to make a really good rebirth, because you're going to be born into a low class, have some difficulties or something like that. And so a being like that hears a loud clamor and then has the vision, like entering a marsh or a forest or, some other kind of not so pleasant place, okay? If it is currently cultivating virtue, okay, that intermediate being who's just taken rebirth is born into an elite class. Sounds like trading in your miles for I hear elite class and I think of the airline. It hears peaceful and pleasant sounds and sees itself entering a mansion, palace, or the like. So again, all these visions that happen according to the karma that we've created, karmic visions. This being then remains in the womb for 38 weeks and there develops all of the limbs and the extremities. 4 days later, it is born. Okay, according to the Descent into the Womb Sutra, there's a quote, the fetus is fully developed after 9 months or more have passed. At 8 months, it was almost fully developed. At 6 or 7 months, it is not fully developed as its limbs are not complete. Okay, anyway. If the being of the intermediate state does not have a desire to go to a birthplace, it will not migrate there. And having not done so, it will not be reborn there. In other words, you're only going to be reborn in a place that you find attractive according to your karma, the karmic vision that's happening, whatever, who knows what the karmic vision is, who knows what we'll find attractive. It's kind of like you're hallucinating and, so your mind's attracted to one place and you go there. But unless you're attracted to that place, you're not going to be reborn there. Okay, so even everybody in the world tells you to go to hell, they can't make you go to hell. Because they can't make you create the karma to be born there, and they can't make these visions happen in your mind either. Okay, so it says, take, for example, the case of those who have committed and accumulated karma for rebirth in hell, like those who have, and it should be here, an anti-vow, such as butchering sheep or poultry or marketing hogs. So remember this morning I spoke about the anti-vow? When you have a very strong determination to do something negative repeatedly, so it's kind of like a vow. So they say the butchers have these kind of anti-vows. So at that time, when the karma is ripening and they're going to be reborn, to see the visions of, whatever they used to slaughter, that on those animals are there, okay? And so in these people's intermediate state, they see as if in a dream sheep and such at their future birthplace and rush there, driven by their delight in their former habits. Yeah, so they have a habit of killing beings. They see sheep or poultry or hogs and they think, oh good, I get to go there and butcher them, and it rushes over there. Okay, then anger is aroused at the forms which attracted them to the birthplace. Again, it doesn't say why anger, but who knows? Okay, you get angry, at which point their intermediate state ends and they are reborn. Okay, so you rush there with desire, you get angry, you die from the intermediate state, and your consciousness goes into the body that you're going to have in your next life. Okay? Hungry ghosts with goiters and others who are similar to hell beings take rebirth in a like manner. Yeah? So if you're a hungry ghost with some kind of goiter, maybe you, I don't know what, you're a human being who, I don't know why they would be attracted to a goiter, but anyway. Okay, if the being of the intermediate state is to be reborn as an animal, hungry ghost, human, desire realm deity, or form realm deity, it observes at its birthplace delightful beings similar to itself. Okay, then conceiving a liking and a desire for that place, it migrates there and becomes angry upon seeing the birthplace, at which time its intermediate state ends and it is reborn. So the same kind of mechanism. Okay, so this is according to the levels of yogic deeds, the Yogacharya Bhumi. Rebirth in hell for those who are not people like those mentioned above, so persons who have an anti-vow, such as poultry butchers and hog sellers, there it occurs in a similar fashion. Okay, then the treasury of knowledge says you desire smells, places, or other things. So here Vasubandhu explains that if the intermediate state being is to be reborn from heat and moisture, because they say that there's 4 types of rebirth. There's rebirth from an egg, from heat and moisture, spontaneous, and in the womb. Okay? So we just kind of went through the womb. Yeah? Here, if it's going to be reborn from heat and moisture, they say like bugs. That's, because of course they didn't have the science to know. It's just, in olden times there's heat and moisture and bugs come out of it, so that's how you think that they're born. So if it's to be reborn from heat and moisture, it craves smells. Well, if it's to be reborn spontaneously, like in the hell realm or a god realm, it desires a place and is subsequently reborn there. It further explains that if this being is to be reborn in a hot hell, it craves warmth, while if it is to be reborn in a cold hell, it longs to be cool. So yeah, I've heard this, that really you have to be careful when in the dying process what your mind is craving for, because if you crave for heat or cold when you're dying, that carries over into the bardo, which could carry over into what you're craving for when you're reborn. Egg rebirth is explained similarly to womb rebirth. You rush to the place, you see beings of the same type, you get angry, and then you die. Okay. Okay. So, in the Lamrim Chenmo, it goes through next the 12 links, but we're going to do that as a separate unit later on. Okay, and go into it in more depth rather than rush through it right now. Also because Gomchen Lamrim doesn't speak about the 12 links. Okay, so I'll read Gomchen Lamrim so you have the transmission for the part we just covered. So when its future parents are, so this is how from there, the rebirth, the intermediate state, you take rebirth in a new life. When its future parents are coupling, it is said of the intermediate state being perceives them or does not. So there are two traditions. So some say they're coupling at that time. This book was saying that they aren't, but you have a vision like they are. However, when it is to be born female, it desires the male and wants to lie with him. And when it is to be born male, it desires the female and wants to exclude the male. Then it sees only the male and female genitals and feels angry with them. It is said it dies from the intermediate state, like a scale tipping, and it is immediately conceived. So when you leave the intermediate state, at that very moment, that's when you take rebirth. It's not you leave the intermediate state, you enter some other kind of limbo and then later come out of that. Okay, it's like the scale. Yeah. Through the parents' intense desire, once thick semen is generated, drops of both semen and blood inevitably ensue. They mix in the place of birth and take the shape of skin on top of milk. Simultaneously, conception occurs. By the power of consciousness, great elements for the senses other than the above combine with them, and the embryo, including the semen and blood, arises along with the senses. But it's said that when you are the first conceived, only two senses are operating, because you have your mental sense and you have the tactile sense. And they say the other senses, to see and hear and smell and taste, develop gradually in the womb. Yeah, because, clearly when you're one or two cells, you don't have eyes or ears or anything like that. Okay, if you, then for those who assert one, the mind basis of all enters. Those who do not posit a mind basis of all consider that a mental consciousness takes conception. There are two views. Okay? If you do not hasten to the place of birth out of attachment to it, you cannot possibly take birth in that place. So if you're not craving for hell, you're not going to be reborn there. And if you don't have some desire to have a precious human life, you're not going to be reborn there either. Therefore, butchers and such, to be reborn in a hell, see those to be slaughtered in that place, and from habitual attachment to them, they hurry there. Then, feeling angry with the image of the place of birth that they see, their intermediate state ceases and they take rebirth. When animals, hungry spirits, humans, desire realm gods, and form realm gods take rebirth, they see beings of the same category in their place of birth, and out of attachment to them rush there. Next, they feel angry with the place of birth, and so on. The rest is the same as before. Those to be reborn spontaneously long for a place. Those born from heat and moisture long for smells. Those to be born in the hot hells long for warmth, and in the cold hells warm for coolness. And according to the treasury of knowledge, egg rebirths resemble womb rebirths, okay? Okay, so I'm glad you have no questions about this. And that's very good, that it's all perfectly clear and you have no questions. And now we can go on to the next section. Yes? Mm-hmm.
One is just a curiosity if there is any description of this process that takes into account the extremely subtle wind.
The what?
The extremely subtle wind. This.
Yeah. This is described according to Sutrayana.
There is another description.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Just curious about that. And then the other one, this has always just puzzled me. Maybe there's no answer. But it seems that when we do the dissolution, it's the feeling aggregate that dissolves second,
Mm-hmm.
early on in that process.
Mhm.
So when I think of that, then I'm thinking, and then there's all this other unpleasant experience that follows
Mhm.
after the feeling aggregate has been
Yeah.
resolved, so it doesn't match up.
Yeah. My idea is when they say this aggregate dissolves, it doesn't mean it totally ceases completely. It just means it loses some of its potential. Because very early on, the hearing sense dissolves, and yet we're told to recite things, and we're told that there's a very subtle sense of hearing, even, possibly after the breath has stopped. So it seems to me that we shouldn't be too black and white, like, okay, this happens, then everything altogether shuts down completely. Yeah, I mean, processes are processes. Uh, they things take a while. Mm-hmm.
What if a being is craving annihilation at the time of death, like maybe killing themselves, or they just want to kind of disappear?
Um,
Would they go through the same sequence, or is it just a distorted sense?
I don't know at the time of death they crave annihilation. When they talk about, are you thinking of the 12 links and the different kinds of craving?
I was reading in the Four Noble Truths book where saying that it was attachment and annihilation were two categories.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, when you talk about the 12 links, when you get to some of the links, they give you the subcategories, but those subcategories don't always occur at the time of death or at a specific time. They talk about craving, different types of craving, but it doesn't mean that all of those may occur at the time of death. If that's, maybe if you could give me the.
I met someone who seemed to want to die so desperately, like to just not exist and go away.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so somebody, may want that. That's a very nihilistic thing. So they may commit suicide. But they're still going to get reborn. Because the grasping itself is so strong that even if they intellectually think, oh, I kill myself, then there's no more self left, everything will cease. Just because they think like that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. Yeah? Because the natural instinct for ordinary beings is this incredible, grasping at I. Yeah? Uh-huh.
If you could scroll up down just a little bit, because my question about the mind, the school that believes in
The mind basis of all, yeah.
can you explain what?
Okay, so there's different Buddhist tenet systems, different philosophical schools. So one of them says that we have what's called the mind basis of all, which is a mind that carries with it all the karmic seeds, all the various latencies that cause our experiences, and so on. So they assert it as an extra consciousness in addition to the five sense consciousnesses, and they also assert another mentality that it's a whole philosophical thing, but they just assert that there's this like storehouse consciousness, and all the seeds are placed on it. Okay, and that's what gets reborn. Yeah, from the school that we follow, we say that there's a lot of illogical or logical inconsistencies that follow if you assert that kind of storehouse consciousness. So we say instead there's just the mental consciousness that is, merely labeled as the person that continues on. That makes some sense? There's this whole discussion within Buddhism about what continues from one life to the next. So that's the thing. And all the schools agree that there's not a soul. Okay, there's not some truly existent self that goes from one life to the next. But then they have different ideas about what carries the karma that is created in one life so that it can ripen in a next life. Okay? Mm-hmm.
Would fear arise during the intermediate stage, or would Buddhist followers still be able to chant during the intermediate stage and lead, sadhu beings to remind them of the teachings and lead them to a Buddhist place, a place where they can find the teachings?
So they're asking if
You can do this for beings in the intermediate.
oh, okay. That I don't know, whether as human beings you can do things so that the intermediate state beings are going to hear you and follow your instructions. That I don't know. You know, if people don't listen to the Buddha's, their teacher's instructions when they're alive, are they going to listen to them when they're in the bardo? You know? I mean, they say the bardo is a tremendously confusing time, that there's just mass confusion, because you're in this new body, you're having all these appearances, you have these clairvoyant powers, as soon as you think of something, you can rush here, you can rush there. Yeah, so it would take, I would say, some pretty strong karmic link with your teacher to be able to spark some memory, some virtuous memory in the bardo. Yeah. I mean, just look at this life. Yeah. I mean, we come and listen to teachings. Is it easy just to even generate a virtuous thought when you're listening to teachings, or 10 minutes after the teachings? Or does our mind just, naturally go to, I want this, I like this, I don't like that? Yeah? And we were very much creatures of habit. And so this idea, we always have this idea. Christianity has it too. You can live any way you want. You accept Jesus before you died and you're saved. Really? It's the Buddhists, have their own version. You live any way you want. Then at the time of death, all of a sudden you think of Amitabha. You haven't thought of Amitabha your whole lifetime. Or people have brought you to do some Amitabha chanting. You go, Amitabha, 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 ice cream, Amitabha, sex, Amitabha, Okay? So what makes us think that all of a sudden, at death, which is tremendously confusing time, that all of a sudden, we're not going to be creatures of habit anymore, and the light bulb is going to go on. Yeah. I think, what the Buddha keeps emphasizing is we're responsible, and we've got to do something with our own mind and train our own mind. And, somebody may have some special karma with a teacher or some special thing because of causes created in previous lives. Yeah, but those are very rare beings. Yeah. So you don't go to teachings, you don't follow teachers' instructions even if you go to teachings this lifetime, but you think from a previous life, I have a strong connection with my teacher and that's going to ripen at the end of this life, even though your whole life, this life, you haven't listened. Really? Yeah, so maybe some exceptional beings, but I think for most of us, yeah, we have to pay attention now and do what we can now and set, really good habitual patterns in our mind now.
There was a point in the mention more about that if you don't have a lot of merit, you get born in lower class.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah. With bodhisattvas, they may do it for a purpose. But you may have virtue in some areas that ripens in some areas and doesn't ripen in others, Or you may have made prayers, not to be born in a high class, but to be born in a lower class to benefit the beings there. Or you don't want to be born in a high class because it's very easy to get stuck. It's quite interesting. They when they talk about these 8 special conditions that make a precious human life really precious. If you're not careful, those special conditions can actually sometimes become interferences in your practice. Yeah? I mean, for Lama Atisha, he was born as a prince. That was very conducive because when a prince renounces, then everybody else kind of looks and says, well, what's he doing? Maybe it's something worthwhile. Yeah. But then other people, maybe they're born as a prince or princess. They get so hooked into living in the lap of luxury. You're born as some wealthy person in New York, and you're living in the lap of luxury. Maybe you have some Dharma imprints in your mind, but maybe it's going to be hard for them to ripen because, unless you have a lot of imprints from renunciation in previous lives, then it can become a big distraction. In the same way, they say, having an attractive body is one of those special conditions, because if you have an attractive body, then people will be attracted to you. You can teach them the Dharma. But again, if you don't have a lot of other conditions present in your life, and you don't have a strong mind, having an attractive body can become a disadvantage, because your own mind could get very hooked into how you look, and people could like you just because of how you look, and so on. So I don't know, I tend to think it's always kind of good to just be in the middle. Not too rich, not too poor, not super good looking, but not ugly, not total high status, not total low status. To me, it just makes more sense. Somewhere in the middle, then, you don't get trapped in one or the other extreme. That's just my thinking. Okay? Mm-hmm.
I had that experience many years ago when I was doing a lot of New Age stuff and, doing practices. And it came clear in my mind, I was grateful to be born in a normal family.
Mm-hmm.
Because I said I would have been such a bitch, such a jerk. Conceit,
Mm-hmm.
it was scary.
Mm-hmm.
I said I was grateful to have that. So I learned to be more modest and more humble.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of work to do with that, but
Yeah.
it came clear to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was reflecting on my own situation that, having in Singapore so comfortable is a result of good karma and sharing state. And yet, because of that, it actually encouraged a lot of affliction.
Yeah.
Luxury religion, and then there's that kind of environment, just the attachment especially,
Yeah.
that comes up
Yep.
very strong.
Yep.
I remember a story when we were watching Kunzan. One of the religions, the friends told us. Raja Kunzan, yeah. He told a story once he traveled with Lama Rinpoche to somewhere in southern America, and they were said to go to a big mansion visiting.
Mm-hmm.
And they were brought into where they were supposed to be staying, and Rinpoche probably said, it's like, dangerous place. And everybody was looking at him and said, what? Why? Why are you using up all your positive karma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Lama Zopa also, born in a very humble family. Yeah, very poor family. So it's not like all great beings have to have these 8 special things. And knowing Rinpoche, he probably prayed not to have that because he saw it as so dangerous. Yeah. Yeah. And I can see sometimes some of my Dharma friends, if they're from a family that is quite well off, and their parents keep helping them when they're ordained. In one way, I mean, their parents create merit. It's tremendously kind of their parents to keep helping them. But in another way, I can see that it creates obstacles for them too. Yeah, because then their parents want them to go on family vacations with them. They want them to do this and that, and so it becomes quite sticky. Mm-hmm.
Back to the time of death,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to verify, I think you talked about last week that you can live a very virtuous life, generate a lot of good merit, but if you happen to be thinking of something non-virtuous, if you're in a bad state of mind, that can throw you to a bad rebirth just because of that moment in time before you die.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why it's very important when we're dying or when we're with other people who are dying to have a very peaceful atmosphere, and to remind people of virtuous things, to not, not be in a hospital room with the TV on and some gunfight going on a movie, not to be there with all your relatives around sobbing and saying, please don't die, I love you so much, because that's going to make attachment arise. So it's very important to have a really peaceful environment. And then if we have Dharma friends, ask them to remind us about practice and so on, or if we're with somebody, to remind them of their practice. If we're with somebody of another faith, remind them of whatever symbols that they're used to from their own religion. Whatever will make their mind turn into virtue. Mm-hmm. 2 questions.
So since we have experienced death over and over since the beginning of time, how is it that we are still shocked when it happens and still afraid of it?
Why are we shocked? Because even though we've done it so many times, because of our ignorance. Ignorance just totally obscures the mind. We don't remember our past experiences. And ignorance just makes us dream up all sorts of wrong conceptions that we then believe. Yeah? And there was
If the mind stream is so subtle as it migrates, how can some people remember their past lives? Or is remembering past lives some kind of misconception?
No, people can remember their past lives. The mind goes from a very coarse state into a subtle state, or a subtler state into the intermediate state. But it still has all the latencies on it. And so then when the mind stream becomes coarser in the next life, some of those latencies from previous lives may ripen, and the person may have memories of a previous life. That usually happens when the child's quite young. Yeah, after you've been in this body for a while, you become so used to this body that any kind of memory of past lives is gone. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Yeah.
Regarding Matt's question,
Mm-hmm.
what it says and what you said about just creating virtuous habits of thought throughout our lives.
Mm-hmm.
That you need to take that very deeply for that to be effective, so that you respond to like unpleasant
Yes, that's exactly the thing. To train the mind so that no matter what we experience, the mind responds with a virtuous thought. One of my Dharma friends in India told me he had been practicing many years when this incident happened. Many years. And he was walking in Dharamsala. He slipped in the bazaar and he fell. And he told me his first thought was, oh shit. And then he thought, oh my goodness, if death comes and that's my first thought, I've had it. Yeah? And so he realized, you can be practicing a long time, but if your first thought is something like that, when there's a shocking situation, then it can be difficult. Mm-hmm. So to really train the mind, train the mind. Yeah? So that even when we hear a loud noise, instead of jumping, we're able to just be there. Or when we hear some bad news, instead of instantly, reacting to it, we're able to just stay and be present, to somehow train the mind. I don't have to react with strong emotion to everything that happens, at least to keep a neutral mind and then change it into a virtuous mind. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's also a good teaching that attachment leads to anger, so that always when attachment doesn't get fulfilled, the automatic reaction that we also have in daily life is anger.
Yeah.
It's frustration.
Yep, that's it. More attachment, more anger. Yeah, we can see that in our own experience, can't we? The more we're attached to something, the more upset we are when we're separated from it or when we don't get it. Yeah. Okay, so just, okay? Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like you start with small things, like, okay, all the condiments. Yeah. To be able to take your food without adding extra condiments. Yeah. To learn to be satisfied with whatever the food tastes like. Yeah. Without adding extra something to make it better. Yeah. Interesting, The mind's resistant to that. Yeah. Isn't it? We want our condiments. I want a little extra sauce. I want some chili. I want some barbecue. I want this. I want that. Because the cook doesn't, make the flavor I want. And, I have to do something else. And, just even to cultivate a mind that says, whatever is in my bowl is okay. That's hard. Yeah? You always want to, twist it some way or another, or, yeah. And if you go first in the food line, it's like, they didn't make enough, because if I take all I want, then there isn't enough for the people at the end of the line. If you're at the end of the line, then they didn't make enough because the people at the beginning of the line took it all. If you're in the middle of the line, then you have both things. Yeah? And this is just with food, which is nothing. Really nothing. When you talk about the much more deep-seated attachments, then we really see the power of attachment and the power of anger. Hmm? I mean, just look how if somebody disagrees with our idea, how quickly we get antagonistic, like that. Somebody doesn't like my idea. Huh? What's wrong with you? So it's so reactive to anything. So this is the kind of stuff. Start with the small stuff and to try and train our mind not to be so reactive. Okay, somebody criticized me. Okay. Yeah, somebody didn't say good morning. That's okay. You know, I don't have to build, because you can see how there's some small thing, then you build a whole drama. Well, can you imagine, you know, as you're dying, some small thing happens, and then with the help of your karma and your inappropriate attention, then you build this whole thing that becomes a vision before you. Yeah. So if you want to be reborn in the Pure Land, you have to get used to building the vision of Amitabha and everything there, or you know, building the vision of a precious human life, or whatever it is. Okay, instead of building the vision of all these people don't appreciate me and they're out to get me. Yeah, that happens at death, then what? What kind of karma is going to ripen? Okay, so it's something to be careful with now. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any more questions? Anything? Okay, so there's a new section coming up, so we'll wait till next week to do that. Okay. I tend to be very kind of pragmatic like this. There may be other people who, you know, say, well, yes, it's possible to change your mind, and you can hear this and it makes something happen at death. And, you know, there's many people who explain more mystical things that are able to happen at death. But I'm not a particularly mystical person, so I kind of go with, you know, cause and effect more. Okay?